Nosotros commands in Spanish is the English version of let's do something, mainly emphasizing the we pronoun. In English, it's a very easy concept because it doesn't matter what verb we use, we simply have to put the phrase let's, and then we put any verb we want, like let's speak, let's eat, let's open, and so on. It literally doesn't matter what verb we use, the form of the verb in the we command will always have the same form as the infinitive. In Spanish, this idea completely changes for basically every type of verb, but there are some patterns to follow. For regular AR verbs, you keep the same ending as you would in the present and change a to e. For regular ER and IR verbs, you keep the same ending as you would in the present and change the e or e to a. If you take a closer look, you can probably tell that only one letter changes, so it's almost like a switch between the types of verbs. The best thing about these changes, and for every verb there is in the nosotros command, is that these changes are kept even in the negative command. Hablamos means we speak, but hablemos means let's speak. Comemos means we eat, but comamos means let's eat. Abrimos means we open, but abramos means let's open. And in the negative, they keep their forms with no in the beginning. That's how regular verbs function with nosotros commands, both in the affirmative and negative. However, there are many irregular verbs in the nosotros commands, but I will not put all of them in this video because you don't need all of them. If anything, I'll give the most useful verbs, ones that you can just memorize. These verbs include conducir, decir, hacer, oír, tener, traer, venir, ver, dar, ser, estar, and saber. In case you want to use these verbs in the nosotros commands, now you know how. And of course, there's other verbs that follow these irregular patterns, but you don't need to know all of them. After these verbs, there are verbs ending in car, gar, and zar, and these verbs have a spelling change in the nosotros commands, while changing the ending to. Practicar becomes practiquemos, meaning let's practice, jugar becomes juguemos, meaning let's play, and organizar becomes organicemos, meaning let's organize. If you see any other verb that ends in car, gar, and zar, remember to change the ending and spelling in case you want to use it in the nosotros command. After these verbs, there are stem changing verbs, and there's one important thing you need to know about them, and that is only stem changing verbs that end in IR change their stem, but only with one letter, like dormir, which goes from O to U. In the nosotros command, it will be durmamos, meaning let's sleep, not duermamos. It's a tricky exception, but it's easy to memorize. There's other verbs like sentir and pedir, which are also stem changing verbs ending in IR, and they would be sintamos and pidamos, meaning let's feel and let's ask for. That's how stem changing verbs, specifically verbs ending in IR, work with nosotros commands. These commands can likewise work with direct and indirect object pronouns, but it's a bit more tricky. In the affirmative, the pronouns are attached to the verb with accents, but in the negative, they're separated with no accent. Abramoslo means let's open it, and in the negative, it's no los abramos, let's not open it. Both phrases have the verb and the pronoun, and it's attached in the affirmative with an accent, but separated in the negative. Compremoslos can mean let's buy them, with them being an object, and in the negative, the sentence is no los compremos, let's not buy them. Both phrases likewise have the verb and the pronoun. Llevémostelo can mean let's bring you it, and in the negative, it's no te lo llevemos, let's not bring you it. Of course, you can make any sentence you want using these commands with direct and indirect object pronouns. The last concept to know with nosotros commands is reflexive verbs. Because we're only working with nosotros, the indirect object pronoun nos will always be used with reflexive verbs, especially in the affirmative where nos is attached to the verb. Spanish has a very important rule saying that when nos is attached to the affirmative nosotros command, the final s is dropped from the verb ending in order for the word to sound better when said. Take the reflexive verb sentarse. How would you say this verb in the nosotros command? You would want to say sentémonos, and while this makes sense, Spanish says that this word sounds bad when said, so we need to eliminate the s to avoid repeating the same sound. So, the phrase would be sentémonos, meaning let's sit down. And in the negative, the indirect object pronoun is put before the verb, while the verb itself is conjugated the proper way. No nos sentemos, let's not sit down. As you can see, in the affirmative, the s is dropped, but in the negative, the s is kept. As a side note, the rule of dropping an s also applies for the indirect object pronoun se, meaning to him, to her, or to them, when it's attached to the verb in the affirmative in order to avoid repeating the same letter and the same sound. How would you say the phrase, let's give him it? You would want to say, démoselo a él, but Spanish says to eliminate the final s from the verb to avoid repeating the same letter. So, the phrase would be, démoselo a él, let's give him it. In the negative, the phrase would be, no se lo demos a él, let's not give him it, with an s present in the verb. How would you say, let's make her it? Hagámoselo a ella, with the s dropped from the verb. In the negative, the phrase is, no se lo hagamos a ella, let's not make her it, with an s present in the verb. How would you say, let's take a bath? bañémonos. In the negative, the phrase is no nos bañemos, with an S in the verb. That's what happens when nos and se are attached to the verbs in the affirmative form. At last, there is the verb ir, which is the trickiest verb in the nosotros command because it's the only verb that has multiple meanings both in the present and command forms, and here's what I mean. If we want to say we're going, we need to say vamos. The word vamos itself is taken from the present simple, which means we're going, but Spanish adds a second definition to vamos, meaning let's go. However, using vamos as let's go is informal in context because there's a second word in Spanish that means let's go. Ir is actually irregular in the nosotros command, being vayamos, which formally means let's go. Both vamos and vayamos mean let's go, but context will change the action based on the situation. The reason why I'm concentrating on the word vamos so much is because in Spanish you have the reflexive verb irse, meaning to go out. This verb is very tricky to understand, especially with nosotros commands. Now that I have shown you vamos and vayamos as let's go, how would you say the phrase let's go out? Since I said that vayamos is the irregular form of let's go, some of you might say vayámonos, but actually it's the incorrect way to say let's go out, so instead you need to say vámonos, using the present simple version of ir with s dropped from the end of the verb. Vámonos means let's go out or let's leave if you want to be formal, and a lot of beginners hear this word but never understand what it means. And now, hopefully you understand. The reason I emphasized vamos so much is because it ties back to the reflexive verb irse, meaning to go out, and rather than using the irregular vayámonos form, you need to say vámonos. In the negative, however, we have to use the irregular form of irse, so the phrase is not no nos vamos, but rather no nos vayamos. Let's not go out. This is how ir and irse function with nosotros commands. This has been nosotros commands in Spanish. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully I made your learning just a bit simpler.